Hi, and thank you for coming. Great to see you. My name is Julia, and I have worked with grants for, I counted 10 years now. It has been since I started. So I personally know how important grants can be, and how they can really make a difference and change the course of a person's life when they receive a grant for a specific project. That is sort of what happened for me 10 years ago when I first came to Iceland from my native Denmark. I applied for a student grant, travel grant to come here. And yeah, since then I have secured funding for, among others, Iceland Airwaves and Mengi, also INNI, to mention some Icelandic companies. And I've also advised many musicians from Iceland in grant applications, both for Tónlistarsjóð, but also for other funds. Yeah, I have a bachelor's degree in literature, and then I have a master's degree in cultural studies from the University of Copenhagen. And I've previously worked with INNI at Reykjavik Music City. And then I have also been a producer in film and dance projects, both in Iceland and abroad. And then I also worked as the daily operations manager in Mengi for a while, before I then founded my own company where I work now full-time with grant applications and project management for musicians and companies in the Nordic music industry, and particularly in Iceland. So yeah, throughout my career, basically, and since I came here back in 2015 for the first time, grant application have been a big part of my work and my life. And I understand that it is a big part of business development and the creative environment. And I also understand the importance of having a project becoming a reality, that it often stands or falls with whether you receive a grant or not. Yeah. And before I dive into the slides, I just want to hear out here in the room, if you'd raise your hand, like what kind of grant you are planning to apply for. So the music grant, anyone? Yeah, okay, nice. Yeah, well, the music grant's the first one, and then the performing grant. But again, of course, you can keep raising your hands if you're planning to apply for all of them. Yeah. Then there's the business grant. Yeah. And finally, the marketing grant. Yeah. Cool. Nice. Okay. Well, what I'll be saying will cover all of these grants. So amazing that we have such a great representation in the house, and probably also online. Yes. So the agenda for today is I'll start out by sort of putting some emphasis on the parts of the project application for the music fund that I think are particularly important, and that I put a lot of time and effort into perfecting, you could say. And then we'll be discussing 3 action steps to get started, to keep going, and to wrap up your application. I also have 4 short exercises with me today that we'll be doing, yeah, during this presentation. And then finally, I'll cover some common pitfalls, just general mistakes that it's very nice to avoid making. And then finally, we also have time for questions. And then Anna-Ruth will also join me again, so you can ask her questions if anything arises. Yeah, it's important for me to say that the following is my take on this. I'm not representing Tónlistarmiðstöð or Iceland Music in that sense. And this is not necessarily like an A to C on how to make a grant application that will definitely give you funding. But what I'm sharing is the methods and the strategies that I have developed that have worked really well for me and that have helped me secure grants for some of the projects and artists that I've been working with. Yeah, and so again, the goal is to inspire you with tools and processes that will make the application process hopefully a smooth progress smoothly, and also more enjoyable. And because I'm a nerd, I might even say more fun. Yeah, so take what speaks to you. I know every application is unique and different, so it might not all apply to you, what I'll be saying. So if there's something that is not relevant to you, just take a brain break for a second or go have some coffee. Yeah. Let me see. Yes, two final reminders. I know that grant applications and creative projects are not the same thing, and sometimes it can feel like you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So also keep this in mind when you're writing your application, that of course you have to adjust it to the rules and the regulations and the formats of the grant that you're actually applying for. But that doesn't have to mean that you need to sort of squeeze your project into some sort of shape that doesn't feel right for you. You can still stay true to the creative feel or motivation behind the project, but sometimes like, what's it called, like chipping a heel and cutting a toe, or the other way around, like has to happen in order for it to fit into the application. Yeah. And final thing, these slides are like very minimalistic and pretty. This process is not. It's still not, it is not for me. It can be really messy and really chaotic. And I hope that these slides will help you to sort of get a better and clearer overview of how to go through this process. And I know that they'll also be shared with you after this presentation. And this presentation will also be available online, so you can always return to it if need be when it gets too messy to manage. Yeah. Okay. So here I have some key points to emphasize. And these slides are sort of the main focus points. So I'll spend some time on this slide. So take a deep breath with me. And again, we will be sharing this. So if you don't get everything that I say now, it's recorded. Yeah. So I'll be speaking about collaborators, then we'll go into the project description, a little bit about the budget, and then finally appendix on this slide. And what do I mean when I say collaborators? Actually, first and foremost, I would say consider the fund one of your collaborators. Because as I think Anna also put it really well, like the fund wants to fund successful, realistic, and interesting projects. And they want to support professionalism in the Icelandic music business, innovation and diversity, and strengthen the local music scene. So the question is, how can your project be a part of that? That's always a really good thing to consider for your application. Other collaborators, always mention who you work with, or other partnerships that are relevant for your application. That could be producers, other musicians, it could be venues, labels, companies, even other grants. If you have already applied for other grants, and you know that you'll be using some funding from them also to fund this project. And I say this because having partners in the project really gives the application more weight, and sort of makes it more feasible, because you're sort of, it shows that you've reached out to real people in the real world about your project. It's not just like a foster, like an idea inside of your mind that you think this could be so great. You've actually considered, okay, how can I make this happen? And this doesn't have to like be several hundred words that you spend on this. Like if you name really directly the names of the people or the companies or the labels that you work with, already there you're really anchored in reality. So that is super good. Another thing about collaborators is that it can really help applications stand out, due to like the unique combination of the collaborators or the partners that you're working with. It can make projects more interesting and more relevant. It's also really good if you can mention, for instance, if there's more than one person or one company that benefits from the funding that you're applying for. So again, you're not applying for 2 million just to put in your own pocket and go to a cabin and write songs. Maybe you're inviting 7 people to come with you, and the grant is also supposed to cover some of their salaries, as an example. And again, no two projects are the same. So everything I'm saying about collaborators now might not even apply to your project. So take it if it's relevant, and yeah, maybe otherwise you can consider it for a future project. Yes. The final thing I'll say about collaborators is if you feel like you are maybe working on a project that is similar to many other projects that you know about, or like you're a jazz pianist and you want to release an album. There have been several jazz pianists that have been wanting to do that before. Again, there's this edge and this uniqueness to the specific collaborators that you choose to work with. So there could also be other perspectives that might help your application stand out. For instance, if you're planning to work outside of the capital area, like if we look at sort of the percentage of projects that get funding, there are a lot from the capital area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so a majority is from the capital area.
A majority is from the capital area, yeah. So that can also be a way of making a project stand out a bit more. Yes, it could also be if you want to collaborate with someone that's like a little bit less of a traditional platform for the kind of project that you're working on. Or yeah, just an unconventional partner in some way. But of course, that's sort of like, then there needs to be a proper explanation for why you're choosing this partner. Yes. Project description. Here I want to say avoid being overly ambitious with very long and detailed descriptions. Focus instead of shorter and more concise project descriptions. I know myself, I have a tendency to maybe write very long sentences, especially if I'm applying in English to a project. And since Icelandic is my 4th language, I think, writing sentences in Icelandic can also be tricky. So I always suggest like cut it up, make the sentences manageable and clear. And of course, there'll always be like adjectives that really help sort of create an image or a world around what project it is that you're applying for. But just again, consider, do you really need 5 different adjectives to describe the sound of your coming record, for instance? Another important thing for the project description is to create a project with a beginning and an end. It makes it easier to fund because it's sort of more clear where does the project start and what is it going to do and when is the project finished. You also help yourself once you have to hand in the report because there's a start and an end to what you need to report. Yeah. Around objectives and actions, be as specific as possible again, and like state very early on what it is that you're applying for and what the objectives and your actions and the actions of the project are. This helps create sort of tangible and measurable results for the project, and that can again also help the fund decide whether these results are something that they think are feasible. And again, you'll help yourself once you hand in a final report, and even just once you start working on the project. You have something sort of to follow in that sense. Yes. And I have an exercise on this in a little while. Context and motivation. I have some questions here that I think will be useful to ask yourself. For the context, like what is the local, regional, national, or even international context of your project? So sort of placing it in a bigger context. Another question to ponder is, how does the project benefit the Icelandic music scene or the music industry in general? Again, depending on the scale of the project, you don't have to change the whole international music scene with your project. What is the motivation for the project? Is there perhaps a larger vision behind it? And why should it receive public funding? I think that's a really good thing actually to consider again. Like, think of the fund as a collaborator, and also like, why should they give your project money? And it's not that you have to write out like verbatim in the application, you should grant me this amount of money because so and so and so, but like have this maybe between the lines a bit more, just to make it a no-brainer that of course your project is amazing and should receive the funding that you are needing. Then if you're dealing with a large project, it might be a good idea actually to break it down and divide the project into phases. And Nordic talked a bit about that, like whether you should apply for the project as a whole or not. And again, every project is different, but consider if you feel like you're trying to squeeze too much into one project description, and maybe it's wiser to say, okay, now I'm going to apply for this part of the project, and then next year or next time the fund opens, I can apply for another part of the project. Yes. And what I mean by that is just it can often be a good idea to sort of take a step back and then look at the larger picture, and see where you are in the process as well, and what you need to get to the next point, again, to make the project feasible. Yeah. And again, I say like this is also how the different grants in the music fund are divided. You know, you have the music grant, you have the performer grant, the marketing, and the business grant. So use these different divisions also if your project is that big. That also helps you sketch out a timeline for your project.
Sorry, can I say? Yeah. So, like for example, in the last allocation of the fund, there was a project that got a grant from 2 divisions, a big project. So you can absolutely, I recommend doing that if appropriate.
So for a very big project, you can send in 2 applications to 2 different divisions.
Yes,
and actually get funding.
For example, this project was both the live performance and they also had a recording element. So they applied for both the live performance grant and the music grant for the recording, and they got both. I mean, it doesn't always happen, but yeah, don't let it stop you.
Don't let it stop you. Apply for as many grants as you want and need. Yeah. The budget. Use actual quotes as much as possible. So if you're planning to work with someone, ask them what they'll be charging you, what their fee is. Here it can also be good to rely on like public quotes, texter, like FIH, for instance, or Ríkisskattstjóri, something like per diems, for instance, if you're traveling, or FIH, yeah, if you're employing other musicians as part of your project. You can sort of refer to these different, yeah, what's it called?
Scales.
Yeah. Scales, yeah. We call it scales, taxte. I hope you know what I mean. Yeah, and then contributions in kind. That is your own investment in your project. And it's always really good to add some sort of own investment. Of all of the different projects I've worked on, it's always been a part of them. You can always find something, I would say, as a rule of thumb, because it can be your own work hours. It could also be if you're already renting a studio, for instance, that you'll be using for your project. It could also be, I mean, this is again a bit like a bigger topic, but for the marketing side as well, like, are you managing your own social channels, for instance? Are you putting some work hours in through that? Of course, it's also good to apply for funding to work with professionals on marketing and promotion. But if you're putting some hours into it yourself, or if you're used to doing the graphic design for your project as well, you can also add that as a contribution in kind. Yeah.
If you have another source of funding as opposed to in kind, but let's say you've received money for part of the project from somewhere else, does that strengthen your application, or does it make you less likely to get the funding in terms of this particular fund?
I think that's a question for you, but if I can start, I'd say it always strengthens the application if you already have some funding, because it shows that someone else also believes in your project, and then you just have to make it clear once you apply to Tonderstasjø what it is exactly that, are you missing $1 million? And what is that million then? What does it actually entail? And what is the other grant covering? So I've also been working with artists and companies like this, where you apply for sort of different sections of a bigger project to different funds. Do you have anything to add?
No, I absolutely agree. It's always a strength. It's better than having just zero in the income part. Yeah.
Okay.
I have an exercise also later on about the budget. But I can quickly say as well that you can also always add if you plan to apply to other funds. So if you're missing 5 million and you can't apply, you can apply for a maximum of 3 here. Then you can also say, you can put into your budget, I'm planning to apply for this fund, mention it specifically, mention the amount, and then also mention what it is that fund is specifically meant to cover. And that could even be a number of funds. Maybe it's more relevant for bigger projects, but again, if it applies to you, then keep that in mind. Okay, final here. This is like my marathon slide. From here on, we're like, the tempo is picking up. I hope I'm not losing anyone online either. Attachments or appendix. This is a great place to put in those actual quotes that you asked for to have in your budget, and also any signed agreements that your project might need. This can be anything that sort of can support like your project becoming a reality. It can be, like I said, contracts or agreements, or different quotes, but it can also be sort of more creative, like if you're already working on some some graphics or visuals that is like directly relating to what you're writing in your project description, you can also add that in attachment. For instance, like if you're applying as a company or like for a business grant, there might also be some policies that would be smart for you to have in attachment, like a sustainability policy, or like gender equality policy, something like that. And again, if you are working with all of these collaborators that I really strongly suggest that you do, then adding letters of intent or sort of signed agreements for collaborations is really good to have an attachment as well. Yeah. Okay. 3 steps to get started. I've called this the structure, the shortcut, and the postcard. And this is basically, how do we start? I actually like to envision when I start out a new grant application that it's a sculpture. I start out with a really rough sort of stone slab. And then you start sort of, I'm not a sculptor, so maybe it's wrong what I say, but like you start sort of sketching out on the stone slab what you envision that it should end up like. And then you start chipping away at it. And sometimes you take a step back, put it away for a little while, and you go back to it. You chip away a little bit more, you carve into it. That will sort of help to keep sort of forming and framing your project, because I've never experienced that the idea or sort of the project brief that I started out with is exactly the same as the one that I'm submitting. So that's also why this workshop is called The Art of Writing a Grant Application, because it is sort of like a creative process in itself. That's my experience, at least. Yeah. So the structure. I recommend that you have 3 documents that support you through the process of applying. One of them is a draft, where you basically copy-paste the application form into a Google Doc or whichever word processing program that they're using. Then a doodle document, which is sort of a worksheet for loose ends, alternative phrases, or rhetorical questions. And then finally also a checklist, where you break the application into steps that you can check off. And that's just such a nice feeling of accomplishment. If this feels like a really big chunk of work, that you can say, okay, my title is done, at least for now. Okay, I got those letters of intent from these 5 different people that I'm working with, done. Yeah. And I also feel like the draft, it sort of helps me have a better overview of the application form, because you can scroll up and down in the document in a different way than the way that it's set up in Rannes. Also working on the timeline, for instance, I find that way easier in a document. Yes. And then for the doodle, I also think of it a little bit as like a trash can. If there are some sentences or some ideas that I'm not super like ready to let go of, but I know it doesn't fit into the application or to the draft that I'm working on, then I put it in the doodle and save it for later. And I have many, many, many pages of doodles for projects that I've since like submitted. And for me, it sort of really helps compartmentalize. Like, you're working on the draft, you're checking how many words or characters that you have, and then everything else, put it in the doodle. Temporary trash can, you can say. And if that really works for you to have a doodle, you can also add a doubt document. Like if your project, if there's a lot of doubt, different questions coming up, you can add a document around that as well. So you keep sort of everything in its place while working on the application. Yes. The shortcut. Here I encourage you to consider how you usually develop creative ideas or projects. Are you a words person, like either sort of free writing, voice noting, or speaking out to other people about your project? Are you using keywords or asking yourself a bunch of questions? I'm definitely in this category. But sometimes I even fall into the numbers category as well. Like, some people also really like to work with numbers, and it's just great to start out with having, for instance, like just working on the budget, see, okay, how much money am I actually applying for? And maybe if it ends up being 20 million, then you know, okay, my project should probably be smaller. And you can start like then seeing, okay, what costs can I cut? That can be another place to start. It could also be the timeline, you know, looking at, okay, which months am I planning to do this or that? And then again, if you have a 7-year timeline, that's a nice way also to realize, okay, maybe I should scale back, or there's some parts of my project that I could even do within the same months. So playing around also with the timeline can help. And finally, images. Do you have some graphic visual ideas? Does it work for you to sketch or to draw by hand? Also, for instance, for the timeline. And again, for attachments, it can also be a nice place to start if it's more sort of a more vague creative idea that you now need to fit into an application format. Then maybe starting with your more creative material can be a nicer way of getting into this process. Yeah. The postcard. That is what I call the elevator pitch, if you're familiar with that term. It's basically a short project description for publication, which many grant applications ask you to make. There's a what, where you describe the project's purpose and what is it about, what will it achieve. You should include how as well, the project objectives and actions, how will it be accomplished, and how will this funding support the project. And then the why, consider the project's potential impact, for instance, artistic or societal value. It could also be community value. And why is it interesting or relevant? Why you? Why now? And writing a postcard like this is also really helpful for me in the process to sort of clarify my point of navigation. Again, because sometimes the project can sort of be playing on several different instruments, if you'll allow that pun. And I know that I need to sort of narrow it down. And writing a postcard like this also helps to sort of figure out, okay, what is it that I want to achieve with this project? How am I going to do it? And why? The postcard can also be a thing that I keep editing and keep reviewing during the process. And it's a fun way also to realize maybe you started out in one place and in the end, your application is taking a completely different direction. And you might realize that more because you have that postcard that all of a sudden says something completely different than where you're headed. And that again can help a little bit with that sense of accomplishment that I talked about before as well, with having the checklist, just realizing, okay, you're in a process and it's changing along the way, hopefully becoming more tangible and realistic. Yes. Then we've reached the first exercise. It basically contains these same questions that I just listed before. We're going to spend 1 minute on each of these 3 points. But before we go into that, I want to ask if you have any questions to this, or if you're lacking any examples, or if this exercise feels quite clear to you. No? Okay. Well, then, yeah, I'll just start a timer. I wanna say again, like it's okay if you don't finish this in 3 minutes. That's actually not the point of it. But it just means that you've sort of opened something up, and hopefully you can return to this and use it once you start working on your application, or use it for that. And it might be helpful to decide on a receiver. And what I think is most helpful is actually to imagine that I'm writing to my grandma. That's sort of the level of what is it that you want to achieve, how and why are you going to achieve it. So again, just so that you're not just writing to a colleague, because this should be understandable for someone that's not necessarily as much of an expert on what you're doing as you are yourself. Of course, I know that like the juries are experts in what they do, but it's never smart to assume that people know too much about what it is that you're doing, because that can also make the project seem more unclear. Yes. All right. And people online, of course, are also welcome to take part in the exercise. So I am starting the first minute now. And 5 seconds to go until the next question. Hi. We're just making an exercise, but feel free to have some coffee, jump in when you're ready. So we're on to the second question now. How will your project be accomplished, and how will this funding support the project? And if you don't know what to write, then writing that in itself can also be helpful, just sort of to keep the flow going. Say, I hate this exercise. I've never written a postcard in my life. Or my grandma's not going to understand what my project is about anyway. And 10 seconds left on the second question. 4, 3, 2, 1. And on to the third and final question, please. Consider the project's potential impact, for instance, artistic or societal value. Why is it interesting and or relevant? Three seconds, 2, 1, and that's it. 3 minutes. And if you haven't already started your grant application, then now you have. So well done. Congrats. All right, moving on to 3 steps to keep going. Here I'll talk a bit about the structure of setting up your project description. Why it's a good idea to jump around in the application format, and then refine and repeat again and again. And like I put here at the bottom, utilize the Doodle document, especially now. Keep going. This is often where I experience that a lot of things sort of emerge, and yeah, the project can sort of bulge out a little bit because you have new ideas or new things to consider, or maybe you need to change some collaborators, or you're getting some quotes that you weren't expecting. So this is maybe the messiest part. It can be the messiest part of the project. I want to say that AI can be a good assistant at this stage to get inspiration and to play with, for instance, sentence structure, accuracy, synonyms. But I don't recommend using AI for the entire application, because then you are adapting your idea and your personality and character to the AI instead of it being the other way around. It can be a great mirror. Also, sometimes realizing that maybe you are spending a lot of words on writing something that all of a sudden AI is suggesting you can write in 3 sentences. So in that sense, it can sort of help you move on, but just don't rely too much on it. Stay true to yourself in your project. Yeah, and so the structure, I have another exercise after this slide, so I'll not go further into that now. Jump around. That is just in this Google Docs where you've added in the full application format. And what I mean by that is, if you get stuck, for instance, on the project description, then jump into the timeline. Or if you get stuck in the budget, then start playing around with your attachments, something like that. And again, refine and repeat. We're sort of creating a sculpture. So be patient with yourself here, and accept that it is chaotic. It's part of the process, is my experience. Yes. Then we have a second exercise, and this is a very rough suggestion of how to structure the project description of your application. And again, it does not necessarily apply to any kind of project, but this is sort of what I have boiled down from all of the different projects that I've been working on, that these are very helpful prompts to use. The first one, the overture, is sort of to set the tone. And this is where you shortly describe what the project is about at the top of your project description. Again, why is it interesting and or relevant? Why you? Why now? So it can the postcard can be very helpful to sort of start out on this question. And then the second one, at what stage is the project? That's where you show sort of the credibility of the project and the skills and the experience that's behind it, and also the willingness to carry it out. That's also something I think is really good to have very early on in the application. So it sort of feels like, okay, this is realistic, and I don't need, when reading through the project description, I don't need to have a lot of doubts about whether this will happen or not. And then third, why or for what does the applicant ask for support from the fund? It's really helpful to state that early on as well. In the project like this, number 1, 2, and 3 is often within like the first 2 or 3 sort of bits of text in the project description, because it also helps you sort of set the tone for where you're going with your project description. What is it that you're applying for? Again, we have a limited number of characters. So instead of putting it all the way in the end when you've explained a lot of different things, it can be very helpful to sort of a little bit like an hourglass structure in that sense. You're narrowing it down to what are you applying for, and then from there, point number 4, more about the artistic content of the project, inspiration, and the directions that you're planning for the project to take. And under the 4, you can sort of, if it applies to your project, like you can try and create an image or sort of a world for the people reading your application, so that the description creates some images or something memorable for someone who's reading over a lot of applications in a very short time and having to make decisions on who to grant funding to. So, for instance, instead of writing, I'm going to work with new sounds, and that's my idea for this new album, maybe you can say, I'm sort of embodying the idea of a guitarist on a horseback in the outskirts in Australia, something like that. Very bad example, but it sort of, there's some images that arise maybe more than saying work with new sounds. Yeah. Finally, the crescendo closing remarks, sort of sending off the project description in a nice way, again, shortly, by describing the process of the project after the grant period. Like, how do you, again, envision that the project might have a wider impact, sort of like a positive, what's it called? Afterlife, in that sense. Yeah. Okay. Are you ready for this exercise? Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Then, yeah. I am, number 4 is so big that we're going to skip that one. So it says 5 minutes up here, but I'm actually just going to give you 4 minutes, and then you ignore point number 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 5. And the first minute starts now. I hope you're on to a second question. 25 seconds have passed. At what stage is the project?
No problem. 10 seconds left on question number 2. And please move on to question 3. Why or for what does the applicant ask for support from the fund?
And again, it's totally understandable if you don't have the final answers to these questions now. Five seconds until the final question. So please now move on to number 5, Crescendo, closing remarks.
Confused about that one. Is it not like the impact that it has in a certain context, like in society, or
Could be.
about the project specifically? Like, okay, after this grant, the project will become this.
It could be that as well. Yeah, it's like it can also be both. Yeah, it can be both, is what I'll say. And again, projects are so different that maybe this point number 5 takes up way more space in your actual project description than necessarily at what stage is the project. And for other applications, it might be completely the opposite. You need to spend a lot of time on what stage is the project. Okay, move away from the vehicle, I was about to say. 4 minutes have passed. We are moving swiftly on to 3 steps to wrap it up. We're getting there. So I want to encourage you to make sure that your application covers these topics, like what is the artistic and cultural value? I'm sort of hammering home some of the same points. Considering your audience and impact for the project, and then also the project's feasibility and planning. This slide is sort of just like a prompt and reminder slide. So I'm gonna move onwards and just check back in with this before you submit your application is my warm recommendation. Yes, so the artistic and cultural value of your project. What makes the project stand out artistically? How does it contribute to the Icelandic music industry and our local communities? And how does the project support the fund's objectives and perhaps even the Music Act? And again, this might not be relevant for your application, but it's always nice to take a step back, consider how does your project or idea fit into the wider society, community, or context. Yeah. And again, please adapt this to the application type that you're writing. And this should fall under the project description as it stands there on top. For the marketing and promotion plan, if that is applicable to your project, consider your audience and impacts. Who is the target audience for the project? How will the project reach this audience? How do you expect them to be impacted by the project? Which media outlets will you use? Why and how? We're going to do an exercise on this, so the questions will stay up there. but basically, like, your target groups can also be more than one group, obviously. So you can also sketch out these questions for each of your target groups. But again, make it sort of as tangible as possible when you're writing your marketing and promotion plan. And for the sake of the coming exercise, I'd say just choose one of your target audiences and go with that one. And then you can always do the exercise for your 5 other target audiences if that is applicable. And so, for instance, a target audience could be people aged plus 75 in East Iceland that are not necessarily attending concerts, and you want to do something about that. Why? Is it because you've talked to them and they think it's too difficult, or there are no concerts with the kind of music that they like to listen to? It could also be like that your target group is jazz lovers in Vestmannaeyja, or maybe fans of people who listen to your music already, or who listen to music by the label that you're releasing on, just to give some examples. And how will the project reach this audience? That could, for instance, be if you want to do podcast or radio interviews on certain channels, local or international. It could also be if you're planning to hang posters in the vicinity of the concert venue that you'll be playing at, or targeted ads on social media. How do you expect them to be impacted by the project? If we take these people plus 75 again, for instance, it could be that you expect them to be impacted in the way that they feel inspired and encouraged and enabled to attend concerts in their local area, for instance. It could also be that you want to sell tickets to a jazz concert in Vestmannaeyja, and that is why you've sort of targeted jazz lovers there. Or it could also be that that you want to expand your target group and reach a new fan base, just to give some examples. And which media outlets will you use, why and how? I think it's very easy to say, yeah, I'm just going to post about my project on Facebook and Instagram, and maybe I'll make a TikTok video. And that's easier said than done sometimes, especially like I've done my fair share of posts and videos that I've put a lot of effort and blood, sweat, and tears into, and then you get like 2 likes, and one of them is from your said grandma that received the postcard. So just sort of consider it like, or make it clear what is your previous experience with these channels. Do you have a following already? And rather maybe choose one channel and do that really well, than sort of spreading yourself thin. And all of a sudden you have to be the social media manager of 6 different channels, while also project managing this magnificent project that you are applying for funding for. So choose one channel and then do that really well. That will sort of be my rule of thumb. And why and how will you use these media outlets? That could, for instance, be like, have you heard interviews on this particular podcast where you think the project, or like the theme of the podcast, is related to what your project is about, or you like the way that the person who's doing the interview is asking questions, or the sort of conversations that arise? Or do you choose YouTube as your main channel because you already have a good following there, or that you've experienced someone else having really good results with doing that, and you want to try and do something similar, for instance? Or is it that you want to strengthen your presence on TikTok? Could also be, a way of doing it. So, next to last exercise. Do you have any questions? All right. Then we are jumping straight into that one. And this time, please answer all 4 questions, and you'll have another circa about 1 minute per question. And the clock has started. So number 1, who is the target audience for your project? And once again, it's not important that you have the answers to everything now. This exercise is meant to start for you to start considering these points. And I hope you've moved on to question number 2. How will the project reach this audience? You don't necessarily have to take this exercise super seriously. Like, maybe playing around with it a little bit will actually give you some new ideas, maybe. And please move on to the 3rd question. How do you envision that the project will affect your target audience? Three, two, one, and 4th and final question, please. Which media outlets will be used? Why and how? Maybe it's a simple exercise, you just need 2 minutes.
I cannot do my application already.
Okay, well
I
done.
mean,
Nice.
pretty much so, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I hope that I'll change your mind with everything I'm saying today or not. Like, it's bittersweet. That's amazing. That's good to hear as well. Nice. Okay, 4 minutes have passed. Please stop the exercise and we'll move quickly onwards. So we started like a little bit later than 4 o'clock. So I'm gonna go a bit past 1:30. And we'll also have time for questions. So if you need to leave, yeah, once we're at the 1:30, then just do so. Okay. We're on the final slides now. We've also reached the timeline and budget part. And here I'll talk about feasibility and planning. Again, adjust this to the application format. Look at your timeline. How will the project be carried out in practice? And include a breakdown of tasks and who's responsible. Like Anna said, it's actually quite a big part of how the application will be judged. So consider the timeline, like, and it can also, what I've also experienced with the timeline is if I'm working on a big project and it's actually hard to sort of fit the whole thing into the project description, timeline can be super helpful if you utilize it to sort of add a bit more of what will I be doing when and what, so you don't have too many like sort of descriptions of what you will be doing in the project description. Yeah. And the budgets, it should be a detailed and realistic plan explaining every expense. Remember to add in-kind contributions, such as donating your own working hours, facilities, or other resources. Remember, if you add contribution in kind, that it should both be added under income and on the costs, so that they sort of balance each other out. Because otherwise, if you only add it under costs, then it will not be a contribution in kind, it will be an actual expense. So that's very important. I often see that people sort of confuse that a little bit. And again, use official rates. Rates is the word I was looking for earlier, takster. So yeah. Yeah, rates. So check FIHAO, RSKAO, if you're in some other union that might be applicable to your project. It's a super nice way because people also often ask, oh, how should I value my own work hours that I put into this? Because I think I'm 50,000 krona worth per hour, but maybe no fund will sort of admit to that. So using official rates as much as possible will also help sort of the budget move along more quickly. Question?
We also have to just fight as musicians for the official rates to be taken seriously. So
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
Like take the official rates, the rates that have already been negotiated and established, take them as as they are, and fight for actually asking for what your work is worth.
Yeah, musicians should not be working for 3 beers a night.
No, musicians' work are not, it's not free. No, agreed. Yeah.
I just heard that there's a new association for live events as well, which has just put up rates.
Oh.
So if you're doing, like someone just messaged me 20 minutes ago about this, I don't know, I actually knew it is, but then now there's like official rates for if you're doing the live event stuff.
Okay.
Hiring for tech people and project managers and things like that.
Wow. Okay. So new official rates for live events. Yeah. Huh?
This isn't beat Bandala Íslenska tónlistar.
I haven't heard this news. If it's only 20 minutes old, then we'll look into it afterwards. But that is great.
It's like, it's literally just someone texted me and was like, have you seen this? There's this new thing.
That's amazing. I mean, the more official rates we can sort of use, the better. So yeah, look into that.
Tech people with Rafvinasambandið.
Rafinnasambandið.
Yeah.
For tech people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
That's very good to know. I'll add that next time I make this presentation. Rafinnasambandið. Yeah, Rafinnasambandið. Makes sense. Yes. Okay. Moving on to the final exercise, budget breakdown. This is an exercise in explaining your project expenses. And again, I'm not asking you to create the budget for your project in 3 minutes. It's a place to start, or it's a place to practice how you, as briefly and concisely as possible, list the expenses of your project. So list 3 key elements related to the project. For example, it could be recording, touring, songwriting, other artists' salaries, marketing materials, and so on. And secondly, for each element, write a brief description of the process. So that could be if it's an estimated cost, if it's a quote you've received, for how many hours, or how many copies, for instance, if you're mentioning you're ordering LPs. It could also be personal, if it's a personal contribution. How many hours of which rate are you planning to put into the project? Yes. Any questions for this exercise? Okay. I've put 3 minutes here. I am just going to give you 2 minutes so that we don't go too far beyond time. And if you need more than that, then you are most welcome to continue the exercise later on. So the clock has started. 2 minutes. We're still on the first minute. We've moved on to the second minutes. Still 40 seconds left. I take you're very confident in the budget you handed in. That's amazing.
No, I mean, I do have doubts. Not about how to make it, but about what things can I use. If it's allowed, you know.
Yeah. We can maybe discuss that in the questions section when you have a chance to ask more specific.
Yeah.
Also, Anna can help answer specifically for this fund.
I was thinking that about booking
And 5 seconds left. 3, 2, 1. And you have started writing out your budgets. This is the next to final slide. We're almost there. I just briefly want to cover the most common pitfalls when working on a grant application. The first one is ignoring guidelines from the fund. I think Anna explained that really well, where they're accessible and what you should be aware of. And what I'll add is take time to familiarize yourself with the guidelines of the fund. It's really worth it, if not for your first application, then for thinking up new projects and applications in the future, sort of just internalizing, okay, how is it that this fund is sort of setting up their rules and regulations? And I also advise that you actually read the guidelines regularly while you're working on your project. Again, just to sort of make sure that you're not all of a sudden into tæknithróun sjóður when you're applying for the music fund, or maybe you're applying for something that the fund actually does not support. It's a good way to sort of make sure that you keep within the framework of this fund particular. Lack of time. It's not fun to be working on a tight deadline. And again, like I said in the beginning, I often experience that the project I'm working on, an application on, changes during the process of writing. So give yourself time as well, if you can, to put the application away for a bit, so you can return to it with fresh eyes and maybe even new perspectives, or talk to someone about it, for instance. Or you have time to wait for these quotes and letters of intent or contracts and agreements that you're needing from other people. Again, it's not fun to have to call people 4 times when there's like 5 minutes to deadline because you need that signed agreement. Yeah. Lack of clarity. I think we sort of pushed that one out of the way with our postcard to grandma. Very briefly, like, be as clear and direct as possible. I'm repeating this, but like, instead of adding 7 different adjectives, is 2 or 3 enough, maybe? And also avoid sort of jargon or overly technical language without explaining it. Again, because you don't know if the people reading your application are as much experts on your project as you are yourself. Again, maybe it can be helpful to think about grandma. Like, would she understand, or is it too complicated? An overly ambitious project is also a common pitfall. And again, that's also where sort of starting to sketch out the budget pretty early on, adding in some numbers and expenses might help you sort of figure out, okay, am I wanting to do too much for one application? This is basically just to make sure that your project is realistic in terms of both scope, budget, and timeline. And what I also try to remind myself often is that you yourself are the one who is gonna manage the project, run it. So also be honest with yourself about how much are you actually willing to do and how much time do you actually have to make this a successful and hopefully fun and creative project. Because it's easy to promise that you're going to do 70 different things when you're handing in the application. When you then get the funding and you have to start doing these 70 different things, it can be a lot. Yeah. And that sort of seeps into the final point, vague budgeting. rough estimates or unexplained figures can be a cause for concern, I think. And again, that's why it's super good to use sort of the description that the Rannes format also allows for in when you're setting up the budget, so you can explain what is this amount actually going to. Yeah. And it's amazing also that the new website actually has this overview of previously funded projects. I advise you very strongly to look over that and sort of see if there are any projects that have already received funding that might be similar in size or genre or type to your project. So that can also sort of help you get an idea of how much money is it actually feasible to apply for. Of course, again, it's never a promise that you're going to get funded, but it's always nice to be able to sort of have a feeling of whether you're within the right brackets or way below or way above. Okay, this is my last slide. We're on the summary now. What we have been going over today is what it is important to put emphasis on when writing your grant application. I've given you 3 times 3 steps. 3 steps to get started, 3 to keep going, and 3 to wrap it up. And then we've done 4 exercises: the postcard, the application structure, we've considered audience and impact, and finally also made a budget breakdown. And finally covered the common pitfalls. And again, I want to emphasize there's no one way to do this. This is what my experiences have taught me, but adjust this, of course, to your own process and personality, and of course your project. And maybe I've been repeating myself a bit during this workshop, but the idea was to sort of approach the same points in the application sort of from different angles and perspectives as well, because I experienced that sometimes it can also sort of help clarify what it actually is that we're doing, and sort of these no-brainer things that maybe of course I'm going to post about this on Instagram, but why and who is it actually that you want to reach, for instance, or why is it that you want to put up a jazz festival on Vestmannaeyja? It's great to consider these things beforehand application. And if you get stuck along the way, I recommend looking through some of these slides as well. There are a lot of questions there that are meant as prompts for you guys to get you back on track. And even the exercises, they only take a few minutes and then can maybe also sort of really help push you forward or give you new inspiration so that you keep going with this and also finish your application and submit it. I also want to say, I know this whole process can seem quite overwhelming and even daunting. The best advice I can give is to get started, and then also not necessarily take rejections too heavily, too seriously. It's a process. It's also been a 10-year process for me. So keep going at it and accept also, like with all creative projects, it's not necessarily perfect the first time around. There's also a reason for why we practice it. And this is a practice as well.